So I welcome you to the Tuesday, January 11th BET Budget Committee virtual meeting. And we're at the beginning of a new term, the 2022-2023 term. So we have a new budget committee with us today. I'm Leslie Tarkington, and I'm the chair. And we have Leslie Moriarty, who returns from the last term and other terms. And we have Laura Erickson, who has joined us. She was an incumbent person on the BET, and she joins us on the committee. So I welcome Laura as I welcome Leslie. And we have Nisha Arora, who is both a newly elected BET member as well as a new budget committee member. So welcome. And today we only have one request for budget adjustments, and that's from our Parks and Rec department. It's for $150,000 for a release of conditions for the field master plan. And we have joining us today, Joe Siciliano, the department head for Parks and Rec, and Blaise Leviton, who's the assistant department head. So we welcome them and look forward to seeing your presentation. And I think, Blaise, you can screen share if you want to do that, or just whatever is your preference.
Hi, yep, I'm gonna pull my screen up now, and I also promoted Ryan Chmielewski, who is the consultant from Weston and Sampson, who will be presenting to this.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see if I get any computer troubles when I go to do this. Share screen. Do we see the PowerPoint pulled up?
Yes, we do. It looks great, Blaise.
Okay, great. Joe, you want to get started then?
I'm here. Okay. I'm just going to give a quick overview. $75,000 was appropriated by the BET on July 1 of 2019. We then commenced to put together a field study committee, and the members of that committee are in this document, so I won't repeat all of them, with a charge to develop the scope of services for the RFP, to hire a consultant, to review the RFP and select a consultant, and to execute the field master plan, which we have done, and it was in your packet last March when we made our budget presentation. And there's also a link in this presentation to that comprehensive plan. It's over 100 pages long, and if you haven't looked at it, we recommend that you take a quick peek. The background basically is that we moved from that to on November of 2019. We selected Weston and Sampson as our consultant after the RFP process through purchasing. The contact person who's on this meeting is Ryan Chmielewski, who's been with us since the beginning as our consultant representing Weston and Sampson. The comprehensive study started in December of 2000 and was completed over a period of months, knowing that we were working with COVID and meeting virtually, and field site meetings were a little bit complicated, but we did get it done. And as I said in your presentation, there's a link to the full study. It was an inventory and an assessment of each location. And matter of fact, it's a very comprehensive inventory and assessment. And also, we met with stakeholders, our own staff, all kinds of user groups, representatives from the Board of Education. So it gave us a good insight on what we were really trying to accomplish in the field study and in this document that's in front of you today. With that, I'll turn it over to Blaise and Ryan. They're going to walk us through the next steps of the plan. Go ahead, Blaise.
All right, great. So yeah, as Joel mentioned here, we included on that original group, we've got who was involved, town staff, the Board of Parks and Recreation, and also a bunch of our athletic field stakeholders. And there was also a number of public meetings where residents were able to come in and talk about this. Here's the slide just that Joe was referencing with the link to the plan that we talked about back in, this was February 2021, last budget process when this one was published. And this was basically, if those of you that were on the BET at the time remember, we had actually gotten a lot of comments from the public on this because a lot of people thought this was the 15-year plan. And it wasn't. This was just like if someone like Ryan, who is a designer and field engineer like this, could take each property and optimize each location, this is kind of what they would do. That was then, but that actually served as a good baseline for what's before us today. And because we were able to take that and to make it into something realistic, into a realistic, actionable plan, that there's something that we can work on. So before we get into the 15-year plan and kind of, we're going to pull out the highlights and talk about what's the problem. Back when this all started, there was a number of people that were contacting us, and contacting, I think, the BET as well, a number of years ago when we started this, talking about the conditions of the fields and kind of the user experience, but we didn't have anything to quantify that. So that's what Weston and Sampson was contracted to do, is really quantify what the problem is and what exactly is our field deficiency. And for that, Ryan, if you're ready for the problem section, I will hand that over to you. So if you just want to unmute yourself there, Ryan.
Thank you, Blaze.
And I have to control the slides for you. So, one of those awkward next slide things.
Sure. So thank you. My name is Ryan Chmielewski. I'm a licensed landscape architect in Connecticut. I've been working on field and athletic projects since 2000. I've been an athlete all my life, so I've been around them for over 40 years now. So I was really excited to work on this project, and we really looked at a couple things. The conditions of the fields, which tell us how well the fields are doing, how much use they're getting, and then also look at the user groups. And Greenwich has a very, very, very robust athletic field participation, sports, educational, and scholastic, private sports, etc. So if you want to go to the next slide. We compare the two, and we use a couple data points. One is, one of the goals of the project is to sustain a good playing field condition for player safety, for visual appearance, for dependability. This is a chart that was developed by North Carolina State University, and it gives us a range of hours that you could put on a field per year in order to sustain certain conditions. So as you can see, the more hours you put on a field, the poorer the conditions are. And this is for grass fields. So in general, 0 to 200 is like a game day field. That's your field you protect and only have limited action on. And really, when we work with communities, we try to strive for the good field condition. There is some wear on the fields, but it's not over the top. The playing surface is dependable and safe for athletes. If you look at that chart again, sorry, Blaze, but a very important thing is that there is a range of hours. So they say 4 to 600, 0 to 2, 8 to 1,000, and that's because every single site that you go to is different. There's a range of soil types, how easily they drain, are they irrigated, or do they have full sun exposure, are they in proper orientation? So there's a lot of factors that go into making decisions about what range we use. And in Greenwich, if we go to the next slide, The majority of the fields are native soil fields, not necessarily designed and constructed for athletic field use. And the big difference is you're getting high levels of foot wear and tear on all your fields versus a residential lawn, even a golf course that's very well maintained, but they have a little bit different types of structure to them. So when we go into your fields, these on the very left, you have all the sites that we looked at. We took inventory of all the sites, and we have inventory versus capacity. So what that means is sometimes you have a baseball field with a large outfield, and on that large outfield, you also have rectangle sports use. So rectangle sports being football, soccer, lacrosse, field hockey, cricket, and others. So when you actually account for the overlays, you only really, if you have a baseball field, say again, and you have a multi-purpose overlay, you only program, or you're able to program those fields 50% of the time. Because if you're playing baseball, it's unsafe to have people in the outfield if you don't have proper clearances, and vice versa. If you're playing in the outfield, you don't want to be running a baseball game. So when it boils down to it, on the very bottom of the chart, we have the orange columns are your diamonds, field diamonds, meaning softball, baseball. And on the green chart to the right, we have rectangle fields. And so the range of hours, we use the lower range of hours for the study because of the native soil mix. A lot of the fields don't have irrigation, some do. And so that's our basis of decision making. On the very far right, we have synthetic turf fields, which have about 1,500 practical hours of use per year. So next slide, please. So when we take all those hours into account, you can see highlighted on this chart, this is called field balance. So field balance is a measurement of your field availability and capacity versus the actual hours that are being placed on the fields. So utilizing that, you see highlighted in the second yellow row those are the 400 and 600 hours respectively, and 1,500 hours for turf. This scenario here assumes there's no field outages and the fields are in their current conditions. So this shows overall that we have a deficit of about 1,600 hours of use, which is equivalent of about 4 large fields. If we actually, so with that, an original scenario, there's really no rest period for the fields. And it doesn't allow the field to be renovated approximately every 10 years. If you have a good field condition, anywhere between 10, 15 years, you need to do some sort of renovation. And when you renovate, you really should allow your fields to rest or grow in for a season or 2 seasons before you play on them. You have been taking the approach of let the full season run out in the fall. You utilize the unfrozen ground conditions in late fall, roll out some new sod. Hopefully it roots over the winter, and then they're back on it early spring, April 1st or earlier. So there really is no rest period. So with that, with adding a rest period for your fields and allowing for 4 large fields to be renovated per year, you would have a deficit of 8 large fields. So then looking at it a little further, there are some anticipated outages with with Greenwich High School and Western Middle School for field remediation. There's Greenwich High School is obviously synthetic turf, some of the fields, and those are going to be a huge loss in terms of hours. Synthetic turf fields provide about 1,500 hours of use versus 400 for grass. And Western Middle School has been shut down for the past couple years, and it's there's not a definitive timetable on how long that's going to take to design and renovate that site. So with that, with those two sites offline, you're looking at a deficit of 14 large fields. And the impact of that is that the remainder of the fields are going to be rescheduled much more aggressively, and if there's even time for full capacity of scheduling on those fields, because they're already, a lot of them are almost already maxed out. So it's an issue that is a serious issue coming up soon. So some of those stresses come from, there's the peak programming periods. You have after school and work are prime time for student athletes, children, adults to utilize these fields, and of course the weekends. A lot of times there's instability in programming. There's field closures due to heavy rain. The climate change has been having higher frequency and higher intensity storms and creating further closures. So with the current field conditions, if you have a poor draining field, you could lose an additional 150 to 250 hours per year on your programming capacity. If you have an inch rain, you could be, if it's a poor draining field, and depending on the time of year, you could be shut down for 2 days after that rainstorm, and even up to a week or a couple weeks if we have back-to-back storms like we did this past year. There's Havmeyer was a game day condition field this year, Upper Havmeyer, and that was in part due to COVID and being able to rest it. It was in very good condition. There's limited lighting on synthetic turf fields. So at the high school, you have lights, but you have restricted use on that. Lighting and synthetic turf fields really maximize your investment. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now. And also neighborhood considerations. When we're coming up with these plans, initially we looked at, well, what is possible and what is feasible at some of these sites, and just to do high level, big picture thinking. But really, there's a lot of the sites are tucked into tight knit neighborhoods, historic neighborhoods. People are proud of what their parks are today and the feel that they get from them. So when you're considering things like lighting, reorganizing, synthetic turf, those are very important considerations. You just want to make sure you have that communication with your community. Organic maintenance requirements are another one. In a high-performing athletic field, a standard maintenance program, non-organic, gives you a little more flexibility in treating your athletic field natural grass areas, but that it does have environmental impacts. And then also there's limited real estate in town. If Greenwich was in a more rural area and there's plenty of land available, purchasing land could be a viable option and a cost-effective option, or utilizing unused parcels. But I would say the majority of parcels in Greenwich are taken. So some of the additional constraints and issues, there's extremely limited flexibility in scheduling, meaning that with those prime time hours and cancellations, if you have to shift fields around and and try to reschedule games. There's league pressures from the outside. If you miss games, you either get sanctioned or you may not be able to participate in your league the following year. So there's some really tight scheduling periods that Don in town, he does a great job with what he's up against. There's some changes in trends as well. There's a lot of use, and the rectangle combination fields are much more used these days. It used to be baseball fields were used for baseball and soccer fields or football fields were used for football. But because of the demand and increase in play, you're seeing those multi-purpose overlay fields utilized all the time. And the multi-seasonal play also means that a lot of sports are transitioning from your traditional fall and spring sports to 10-month play out of a year. So that's putting, we're used to maybe be able to rest fields in the fall or in the spring. That's becoming few and far between with the amount of participation for these different sports teams. And the last bullet there, multi-sports played simultaneously. So kids are playing 2-3 sports a season rather than a single sport, especially at the younger ages. So it's just putting a lot more demand on your fields. So in general, there's about a 1,600-hour deficit if all your fields were online and in their current condition. There's 3,200-hour deficit with a little bit of work and meaning if you rest some of your fields for a renovation and a little bit better conditions, and then the 5,700-hour deficit in your current state with WMS and GHS going to be offline pretty soon. So what does that result in? Poor conditions and frustrating user experience. Field time is a premium. A lot of people are competing for field time. Different sports are competing for field time. And, this study really revealed how much stress there is for programming the field. It also limits the amount of expansion of programming should new sports come into play or trends shift. Other leagues or other teams want to come in and use the fields. It just, Park and Recs has to turn down groups occasionally. And there's a good priority system for allowing use of the field that's in place. And yeah, this is the overall result of the over demand of the fields.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. So just as we get into the solution, I just wanted to remind everyone we're given a lot of information. And we also just finished this yesterday, as I was talking about with Leslie. And so we know everyone got this just got this, and there's a lot of information. So obviously we're going to go through this, but we'll have plenty of time for some questions and all that, because we're really putting a lot of information out here. So just to move this, so when the team, Ryan, Joe, myself, and the group that we mentioned earlier, and we also have Donald and Tim, our turf ops manager, on here as well, put this together. We basically took that plan and all the data that Ryan talked about and put together what we all operate in here in town and also on the BET in a 15-year capital plan, something that we could actually implement and translate into some action. The goals of this plan were in multi-phases. The first is to start addressing our immediate deficiency with some low-hanging fruit. And then over the longer term here, the next 5 years, we can kind of eliminate the rest of the deficiency and then build in some capacity for that time that Ryan was mentioning, that's standard in other communities where you can either rest fields or allow for some shutdown for renovation, as well as some soil alteration. We also want to increase dependability with the weather closures that we experience here that are longer than in other places with engineered fields and stuff. There's a lot of problems for the user groups, and luckily we have Donald, but we're completely dependent on Donald, who can shift things around and move things around in a pretty complicated way. But we want to overall increase the dependability of our field programming, and then achieve the good field condition rating for pretty much all of our fields across the board where we can, as well as, outside of just it being a COVID year, like Ryan mentioned, have some game day field condition options available, which is something that we really, outside of a COVID year, don't usually have for most of our user groups. And so some key assumptions here as we get into our 15-year plan. The first one came from the first selectman's office. That's no synthetic turf on BOE property, except for the soil remediation projects, like for capping the soil remediation. No public use of the BOE fields during school hours, which is standard. We're also anticipating at some point, as we all probably are, a return to normalcy in BOE programming. Right now, basically, the schools are outside whenever they can be with COVID, and the fields, as Tim has pointed out, have seen a huge increase in wear and tear as a result. But we're not going to design to that level of use. We'll design to some type of normal BOE programming outside. We are assuming, as you'll see in our 15-year plan, that Western Middle School soil remediation will be completed, and it will use synthetic turf as a cap, so you don't have to dig down as far. We're not proposing an expansion of field light hours in this plan. And we also would assume that we would limit some of our max use hours to sustain those good field conditions that Ryan had presented in the beginning. So that all translates into this. This is what we've been working on. In the 15-year plan, when you get the actual budget, this is all tucked into the field master plan design and implementation project line for the Parks and Rec side, not the BOE fields. For the numbers behind the Parks and Rec program, this is how this would break down. With a heavy focus on this in the first 5 years of this 15-year plan. A lot of those goals were targeted, a lot of our data analysis, where we put a lot of emphasis on these next 5 years. So to zoom in, that's essentially where it looks like most of the investment we're proposing is on the town side. The BOE project is the dollar amount is much higher than what Ryan had originally proposed if we were designing this, because this is the soil remediation problem at Western Middle School. That's where a bulk of that money is coming from. And just for reference, that budget amount and that timing for that project, which is recommended as a high priority from Weston and Sampson, it is from the fiscal year 22 adopted budget. So that Western Middle School field remediation, that $8 million came from the Board of Ed, the fiscal year 22 budget, and that timing also came from then. But we would support that as being a top priority if possible. So the actual use and the investment of that plan, and Ryan, also, if I missed something, or Joe, please jump in. I just figured we could go through this and then we'd probably have a lot of discussion. The low-hanging fruit is drainage improvements. So this is a total cost of $1 million. This is the originally allocated a portion of the $350,000. So that's about $300,000 of that we would use that money for, $50,000 for some of the other design work, and as well as the $150,000 that's conditioned to get this drainage work underway. And then before you in fiscal year 23 will be an additional $600,000 to close out this first part of this project. This is for the low-hanging fruit. And a lot of this would be focused on, based on our analysis, at Moretti, Upper Havemeyer, Central Middle School, which I'll talk about in a second, and Binney. And at Binney, most of that would actually be testing the water table because that's in a flood zone. We want to, test that water table to see if there's something we could do there. And as Ryan mentioned, we use a lot of native clay-based soils and some of our grass, and those take longer to drain. They're not designed. So sometimes these fields are closed for excessive periods, whereas if they had the appropriate drainage installation and use some better soil and re-engineering, that these would be open much faster after weather disruptions. So the
Yes.
first, yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Just to play off of that, so fields drain in a few different ways. One is by your root zone mix that you have, that's where the grass grows. 2 is your subsoils below that. 3 is your surface drainage, how much pitch or how much gradient there is to your fields. If you have steeper fields, the water will surface drain off quicker. If they're flatter, it'll take longer for the runoff to convey off the site. And really, the third is how compact, and if you have any restrictive layers even below that. Do you have groundwater table? Do you have ledge? Do you have overcompacted soils from construction staging areas for a lot of the school building projects, or when the project was originally constructed? So there's a lot of different things that need to go into soil test pitting.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd rather have you explain that than me. The next thing on here for fiscal year 23, which was shown in the fiscal year 22 adopted budget, is Western Middle School. This one we are including in fiscal year 23. I'm not sure where the Board of Ed would come from with this, but in our model, we're recommending the soil remediation and then a synthetic turf rebuild. And this, in terms of hour gain, is one of the biggest potential hour gain projects in town right now on our existing sites. Ryan, did you have anything to add on Western Middle School?
I do.
No, I think I worked in my former tenure. I worked on the COSCOB project, and that was a soil remediation site as well. And the turf field was used as a remediation cap of having a cover of 2 feet versus the typical 4 feet of soil. So from that standpoint, it does provide benefit when you do have impacted soils below. And also the 1,100 hour gain is a balance between, well, people are like, well, if you are putting synthetic turf, how come you're not getting 1,500 hours or 3,000 hours? But you have to take away the grass hours that are already usable there, or not exactly right now, but hypothetically, there's 400 or 600 hours of use on your field. You take the net difference between the two, and so there would be a gain of 1,100 hours.
Joe?
It's just as important to understand how valuable this Western Middle School project is to the town. Synthetic turf would give us a definite opportunity to program that field to the maximum. And even though we just said that we're not recommending any lighting, when this project comes before the BET for funding, we should look at definitely how the artificial surfacing helps with the remediation cost. And also, this is an ideal location to talk about lighting again. We have the bakery on one side, the school, we have the town transfer station on another. There's limited public issue here. And with the lighting systems that are out there, the LED lighting systems that are much more advanced than anyone that we have currently in Greenwich, we could solve a couple of problems. So you just increase the hours of use by lighting. If that were to be the pleasure of the Board of Ed and the BET as we move forward with the remediation of the Western Middle School.
Yeah, with that, so if adding field lights or sports field lighting, you could gain 500 to 1,000 extra hours per year for a relatively small investment cost compared to a full synthetic turf field in a real estate location somewhere else. Just high level thinking, it's about 100,000 or so per pole to install. If you have a 4-pole system, it's 400,000 to 500,000 after soft costs. Whereas a synthetic turf field, if it's 100,000 square feet, it's 1.5 to 2 million, $2 million. So it could give you a lot of gain if that was the way the community decides to go. Additionally, having fields like at Greenwich High School and Cos Cob, you can put a lot of hours on those fields, and it also, what it does is it takes hours off of some of the natural grass fields, and so there's a net benefit to that as well, reducing the wear and tear on your grass fields and increased maintenance.
So the next, on the town side, PNR, Tuffle Field, which is at Byram Park, in fiscal year 24, we were showing starting with the design and then construction in 25. That's the next biggest top kind of like bang for our dollar, where there's low impact on neighborhood. We already have, it's one of the only places with existing light hours where we could leverage that. And if we put a large synthetic turf field there, that seems to be one of the most prime locations where we have an opportunity to get a net gain and whack a huge chunk of that deficiency off in one single project. And then Eastern Greenwich Civic Center Field, the timing of this would be to try to line this up with the construction of the building. The current field design and also the current location of that field, we have significant drainage problems. And so if we were redoing that building, that was another prime location where we could put in an engineered field with the appropriate irrigation and drainage that Ryan talked about a little bit earlier. And I have this, we've got this note here about Central Middle School. So we, in the adopted fiscal year 22 capital budget from the BOE, they show a field, a $2.3 million field project in fiscal year 24. We are assuming in this model, we supported the Central Middle School project, but we're assuming for the purposes of this that would be aligned with potential building construction and a master plan for the property, which in the 22 budget, the Board of Ed shows in fiscal year 32. So in our model, we better aligned the Central Middle School field project to start along with construction lines out at that point. And in the short term, since that's a prime location, that's one of the reasons we have Central Middle School in our model for drainage improvements, some low-hanging fruit to provide, potential, well, really almost a decade still worth of relief. If we made some drainage improvements there, we do support the long-term project, but in our model, obviously the BOE and we haven't seen the final budget yet for fiscal year 23. So I'm not exactly sure yet where Central Middle School will fall in, but we're assuming it'll be lined up with the potential for building, and we're using the adopted fiscal 22 budget for that. On the first 5 years, Ryan or Joe, did you have anything you wanted to add on this piece?
No, thank you.
Just briefly, the Tuffle Field, it is a conversion to turf, and it's also just not converting in its current state. It's reorienting the baseball field to optimal field orientation to get the batter's eye out of the sun, as well as it gives a little bit more reprieve for foul balls going down third baseline into the splash pad area. So it gives a little bit more of a distance to that.
Excellent, thanks. And then, so for reference, this is kind of putting everything in perspective with the total cost across the board, including soil remediation and some of the BOE project, like with Central Middle School, keeping that looped in here. And comparing that with as Ryan said, this is the net gain in hours. So subtracting, obviously we already have an existing field, along with a little bit of a description here. So looking at if with all this together, this is an expensive program that addresses, though, completely the existing deficiency and also allows for some surplus. To kind of summarize that, as I said, the focus in that first 5 years was to tackle that existing deficiency. And in the first 5 years, we can basically eliminate, 2/3 of the deficiency. Here's the total cost on the town side, 7.25 million in the first 5 years. BOE, the 8 million, that's the soil remediation project. And as we look across the board here, this proposal as a 15-year plan would allow for some expansion above that deficiency and also allow for the proper resting and field restoration. In addition to addressing that deficiency, the way that this is modeled, we would have, better conditions. We would also address the fact in the report that we were under funding some of the maintenance on fields. So one piece to consider here in the cost is that we would be, spending some money on field maintenance and proper maintenance as well. And so we're including that in, those fields that are getting work over the next 15 years that are getting worked on that would also address their existing maintenance needs as well. We'd have more flexibility in scheduling. This allows for future use considerations, including expansion, but also gives more flexibility in a rectangle. For example, a large rectangle supports many different types of sports. As Ryan noted back in the problem, we actually do have a surplus of diamonds, but diamonds don't provide the flexibility. I mean, those are much more limited compared to, lacrosse and ultimate frisbee and rugby and the new trends in sports that have been picking up for years here in Greenwich and that we've heard from the user groups. The biggest piece about this 15-year plan and why it took so long to design this way, and I think everyone here can appreciate this piece, was the consideration to neighborhoods. It was something that we've heard, kind of loud and clear. People are proud of their neighborhood parks. They're very sensitive to traffic, parking, the use. And so this is something that we are, significantly constrained in some elements. And so when designing something, we've really, tried to put a lot of thought into, this plan being something that really considers neighborhoods and how people feel about the impact of their neighborhood. And some future considerations in the report, field, as Ryan mentioned, field lighting in combination with synthetic turf is the most cost-effective way. And I see their typo there, cost-effective way to maximize sports programming. And the lighting options that are discussed and that may be discussed, like Joe mentioned, are essential to both our experience on our fields and expanding playability for the lowest cost amount. And so that was the summary of the presentation. So Ryan or Joe, before I turn the PowerPoint off, was there anything that you wanted to add on this piece?
No, I think, a lot of thought and hard work has gone into this, a lot of evaluation. Ryan now is an expert in every one of our fields, so we're glad he's still with us and continues to work with us. We learned a lot from this report, and we were able to quantify some of those misinformation that was out there floating around. One of the things that we were kind of disappointed about, and maybe that's not the right word, is that we did get some participation from some of the user groups as far as, we had several Zoom meetings, we had several notifications, and the ones that there were a bunch of groups that did step up to provide information, and then there were some that hung back. So we tried to make the best of the information provided and also our own knowledge, which really comes from Donald Moore, our field scheduler, and Tim, our field operations manager, about how things really perform out there and how things get scheduled and the needs. So there's a lot of information passed there. It's a good, the original plan gives us a basis of inventory and identifies certain issues. And this also gives us a direction to go in, that we should go to in order to improve some of the overall opportunities for the sports programs in town. So with that, I'll just leave it, and Brian, unless you have something to say, we'll take questions, I guess.
Yeah, just to reiterate that you do have a very robust sports program. You have, we evaluated 28 sites with 38 field areas. And with that amount of demand and capacity, there's really no silver bullet. There's no one project that's going to solve your problem. It's a multi-step, multifaceted approach, and it's a long-term commitment. It's just not year one, year two, everything, we wash our hands of it and it's gone. It really takes an investment by the town and its community.
Okay.
So thank you. So thank you for your presentation. I think it was most informative. The first thing I would ask, Blaze, would you just send to Roland for circulation to the full BET, the report from last year, so that everyone has that? We have 4 new members, and then we also can put it into the same slot for this meeting so that all the information on this project is together. That would be most helpful. So now I'll take questions. I don't know, Leslie, do you have any questions or comments or whatever?
I do. I guess I have a couple questions on process, and then I do want to go back to the charts to just get a little bit more understanding of some of the numbers presented and how the data is calculated, if that's possible. But just on process, to go back to what Leslie just referred to, if I'm correct that the results of the field study was discussed with the budget committee. I think it was at the Parks and Rec budget meeting last year, so about a year ago. And at that time, we all agreed, and I think you had proposed, you need to develop an implementation plan from that study. And so this is the next time we've heard from you. So, some of my recollection of the details of that study clearly are going to be a little bit vague, I guess is the answer. I did go back and look at the study. I have the copy of it. It's more of a, just an inventory, as you said, Blaze, of what we have, what the possibilities are. It doesn't really talk to the usage of how the town use the fields, right? It's a soup to nuts. Here are all your fields, and here's what you can do with your fields. So on process-wise, I think you alluded to the first step in determining an implementation plan to understand the user base, how we use our fields, again, to identify the big hits, right? Is there one project that would do better to solve some of the solutions? So do you have the data that you reviewed to understand the user base and the segmentation of that user base, being schools and school sports and the rec programs, then the youth groups and the adult groups, et cetera, so that the number of hours kind of were segmented by the types of usage?
Yeah, I can take that answer. In the initial report, we do have that breakdown. The town keeps record of demographics of each of the sports groups and age, participation. Are they from town? Are they out of town? Because that's really their way of determining who gets priority over the fields. So that data is tucked into the report,
Okay.
And it was taken into consideration.
Okay, I'll go back and refresh myself on that. Process-wise in developing the implementation, Joe, you had mentioned that you kept that committee together that identified the scope for the initial study and determining the implementation plan. But I know that Parks and Rec Board hasn't discussed this plan. I don't know if you plan to go to the Parks and Rec Board. I'm not sure how much the Board of Education was involved in developing this plan. Can you just tell us what, who you work with in developing this?
Well, the primary people were here: Blaze, myself, Brian, Tim Coughlin, our field operations manager, and Don Moore. But it's not to say that we have a field committee of the Board of Parks and Recreation, which is like not the board, it's a subset that looks at opportunities. We've involved them on a very minimal basis, and I'd have to say that we will go to the board with this report to kind of update them. But you know, this is a number of people with a number of input. The field committee of the Board of Parks and Recreation does review all applications for field use, in the sense that if you're a field user group that comes back year after year and you require 500 hours, I'm just paraphrasing here, and then all of a sudden you want to expand your program, the Board of Parks and Recreation Field Committee reviews those expansion applications to make sure of two things. One, you know, what's the reason for it? Two, are we duplicating programs? Three, are you primarily a user-based operation? You know, what's the percentage of users come from residents or non-residents? And all of that works into our field implementation of assignments, because there are certain criteria that you have to meet in order to get priority field assignments. And we don't want to create a definite duplication of user groups, in the sense just because somebody is unhappy with the current user group and decides that they want to splinter out their own group, and now that duplicates the request for the field hours. The original field hour request doesn't go down, it's just an additional more field hours. So we're very particular on how we manage the field time. That doesn't 100% address your question, Leslie, but there are many moving parts to this. And we decided that on the Board of Ed's side, we would go full force in the first 5 years to support the Western Middle School opportunity to get resolved. And that's big for us, because if it gets resolved with artificial surfacing, or if it gets resolved with artificial surfacing with some lights there, you can see how that takes a huge chunk out of the deficit that we have. And that would be a big plus for us. And so I think we're all in favor of that getting resolved. I mean, so there was not a question of talking to people at the Board of Ed for that. The outer years, obviously, you know, as things develop, we tried to align with the Central Middle School, with the building plan, and we can talk to the Board of Ed on the rest of it. But our first push here is for the first 5 years, and to see how much of that deficit we can buy down. And it will also impact the outside user groups and school groups that use the other use fields that need to have drainage or some other type of improvement. So, you know, I think no one's going to be against trying to improve the field condition.
No, I agree with you. And this is an important initiative for the town. I think it talks a lot about the quality of the services the town provides to improve our field conditions, and preferably the amount of fields we have, though there looks like there are limited opportunities for that. But before I go into the data assumptions that I'd like to be walked through a little bit more detail on the calculations, just to understand, you've just made a reference now of improving the conditions of the fields. And I think in the capital requests that you have out there and from last year, there are drainage improvements and other minor changes to some of the fields. The data that's provided in this report, does that only talk about the major efforts you're taking? Are there additional maintenance routine steps that you're taking to improve the conditions of other fields, or is this the scope of the improvement plan?
You're right. We did talk about that, and to kind of step up our maintenance program using things like overseeding, top dressing and overseeding, aerification. We talked about different types of aerification of certain fields. We talked about those types of practices, irrigation where and if possible, those types of things. And those are part of really the other part of the maintenance program that's, part of our general maintenance funding every year, and how we can improve those practices and to get the most that we can out of those opportunities to improve the field conditions overall. So right now, I mean, because of COVID, I mean, at least we had some great field conditions when we came out of COVID because nobody was playing any sports. So we had a rest period. Now, last year, when people started to participate more, we could see some of the deterioration. Talking to Tim, we are one of the towns that probably overseeds and our fields more than any other town around. And we try to catch it at the right growing season, whether it's in the spring or in the fall. We've started to increase additional practices of aerification, and there's several types of aerification. You know, there's deep tine, there's core, there's different types of aerifications, and each field would get the specific one that would be most beneficial for that location. And we also looked at some fields that we could, you know, if we had water on them, or we could improve the watering patterns, what would happen is that we can grow grass in seasons that normally are lower impact, like summer. I mean, fields that are not irrigated, it's hard to grow grass on during the slack time. And right now, fall and spring use is as high as it can possibly be. Summer seems to run off a little bit because most of the programs are geared towards fall and spring, whether it's scholastic programs or whether it's recreational programs. It used to be that, you know, a lot of sports were played throughout the summer. Very few are played throughout the summer now. And just, we have some baseball, we have summer camps, we have things of that nature. But the high impact time are definitely fall and spring. And of course, those are the best growing seasons for grass. So we try to fit all of this in as best we can in order to maximize the amount of playability, the condition of the turf, and the product that we're producing, you know, for the public. It's a big mixing bowl, and it takes some finesse to do this. But we will continue to look at those practices and implement as much as we can, because they are beneficial. These are things maybe we were doing before, but at a lesser scale. And also, I think if we step it up some, we'll see some of the longer term benefits of the, reducing the compaction, being able to get the root zones down deeper because we're not compacting the soil that much, top dressing, overseeding, and hopefully irrigate a few more fields so we can grow during the slack time of the season.
Do you expect to be able to use the funding that you've had in the past few budgets just more effectively to do these programs? Or are you seeing that you need additional funding for these maintenance and other smaller field improvements?
I think the last time we talked, and I mean, myself and Blaze with the budget committee, in the original report, it talks about that we maybe have been underfunding some of our program here. We'll take a hard look at that and see what we can absorb within the current dollar amount. And, if we need the additional funding, we'll come forward and ask, and we'll cite some examples of how it most effectively would be used, so that we're not just asking for money for not for no reason. We're asking money for a specific purpose. We went out and had each field looked at for deep time terrification at each location. We have estimates on how much that would cost to do a townwide program, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it isn't an unreasonable amount of money to do that type of thing. So those are the types of things, as we experiment with some of these new processes, where we'll also see what the benefit would be to do a townwide program at least once a year on a deep time aerification program, and then we can cite other fields for maybe a second opportunity that we know get high impact, high compaction use, and obviously continue on with the seeding and to look at where it might make sense to put some irrigation.
Yeah, so, Joe, to follow up on that, just one thing to consider is that if you still do put additional maintenance, that's going to help the overall condition and help be able to grow grass or get better drainage or decompact the surface. However, if you are overusing your field and you have the foot traffic that you have on today, it's very difficult to maintain that good condition. It'll be short-lived. So, the maintenance regimen, the routine maintenance regimen is very important, but also having opportunities to gain hours is also equally, if not more important.
You're right. The improved maintenance is not a solution to the deficit. It just will. It'll give us some improved conditions, but And it should be part of our practice as we move forward to use the best maintenance practices and the most up-to-date ones that are out there so that we can achieve the maximum that we can out of that.
So let me ask Leslie, I wanted to go back to the data assumptions charts and some of the other charts just to better understand the data that's presented. Do you want to do that now? Do you want other people to ask just more general questions first?
Leslie, I'd rather have the others, Laura's had her hand up for, a while, and then also ask Alicia, if she has questions. I also want to make sure that we focus on getting, obviously your question is very important, but whether that becomes more of an issue that we need to address during the capital discussions, during the February meetings, or whether today, what I would like to be addressed after we hear from Laura and Nisha, if they want to speak, we know Laura does, is what exactly is in the 500,000, for the drainage, and a breakdown, by field, maybe a breakdown by costs. And then, I guess for the February meetings, Blaze and Joe, we'd like to see that same information for, I think it's 500,000. I've moved away from that page that you have for that in the capital, but that's a different discussion. I just like to make sure this other is handled. So let's move to Laura and, make sure she has her questions out there.
Thank you, Leslie. First of all, I want to acknowledge all the work that's been done to date. Joe, Blaze, Ryan, Don, and Tim, who are on the call. I think this is a really important project for the town, and I applaud you all for your efforts. I think we're making some good progress, which we all are in favor of. This was a lot of information to absorb in a short amount of time. So I have to be honest, I'm not sure if I'm fully prepared to vote on this item today. I have a lot of questions about the 5-year/15-year capital plan, which I know we will go into in more detail when we meet in February. So I don't want to ask too many detailed questions. Some of them, just to give you a preview, I know now with the skating rink project, there's talk about Tefl Field reorientation. So how does that play into? We all have to acknowledge that the cost for Western Middle School remediation has now been projected significantly north of 8 million. Approvals are still hard to come by. So how does that impact the timeline? I went back and looked at the field study. Tuffle Field is actually in pretty good shape, rating wise and facility wise, but I can understand that because of its location, it's already lighted. It could take some much needed pressure off of the western end of town, especially with the Western Fields out of commission. So I get all that, but I don't know how detailed we want to get into that today. I think that's all to come. I guess, the item before us is release of 150,000 for drainage. And I guess if you could talk a little bit about, what those funds would be used for. Do you need them now? Do you need them? Would February be okay? What's the plan? How do you do this with spring and field usage? That would be helpful if we could just focus a little bit. I've given you a preview of some of my big questions, but just to narrow us down for the topic at hand, if you could just answer about the 150, that would be great.
So I'm just going to step in, Blaze, for a minute before you start here. So if you'll just sort of bear with me. The point number 2 on the condition is BET review and approval of the specific use of this appropriation. So I think that is supplying, the clarification for what Laura has just said. So I just want to make that point for the public because they don't necessarily see this information.
So Leslie, I just want to say something. I get the sense because as much we had a courtesy, it took us an enormous amount of time to collect this and understand it ourselves. So we're not trying to push this on anyone today. We just have, if this discussion continues on about information, questions, etc., it's fine. What we need to kind of think about, though, is that if we're going to plan for some fall implementation, we'd like to know if we can get a decision on the 150 by the February BET meeting, not essentially the budget meeting, because we can have some more conversation about the capital plan there, but the release, because it'll take us that long to get get the consultant on, do the design work, get a contract, the implementation, and we would shoot for the season, after the season starts to close in the fall, to do some of that drainage work. Okay, so it'll take us, 4 to 6 months to get all of that together. And we want to be ready to go for the fall shutdown of the programs, so that, if we don't need necessarily a decision on the 150 today, but we'd let, just thinking out the next 6 months or so, we need to have some, closure on that, so that we can start to plan, get our design work done, work on, implementation, get the contractors lined up, et cetera, because we only have a short window, maybe in November, after some of these programs stop, to really get the work done before we get into the winter months. So if you could
Joe,
kind of think about that a little bit.
So Joe, I think, I'm sorry, Blaze, I keep doing it. Joe stepped in here. I think, clearly, we understand that.
Okay.
But the question is, did the information come in for part 2 of the BET review and approve with a specific use of this appropriation? I think Laura has raised the question. And I think that probably you and Blaze and Ryan can put together that needed additional information for the February 16th budget committee meeting, because this is, operational, our monthly meetings, rather than the capital plan, which will handle separately at the February meetings. So, I think, and also, in terms of preparing data, certainly you can, Laura did ask a question here, and I stepped in just to originally to read the condition, but I think it directly related to Laura's question. And I don't know whether we need to pursue this much further, Blaze. I think the direction that we've headed. You've identified some fields, I think, and if you could, and it's for drainage. I think that, once you identify, and perhaps the easiest thing to do is even though it's in the capital plan for next year, do the drainage piece for the fiscal year 23 plan, but keep fiscal year 22, and was going to be done separate, so that the release on the condition is very clear at the February 16th meeting. And I think that answers Joe's question. And once we set up a meeting, I think that certainly Roland is working on the days, but we're not there at all.
Yeah, I think Laura's
well,
question is important, and we should give her an answer, and that'll answer other questions for members of the BET, because I'm sure there's going to be, if Laura didn't ask it, someone else would have probably asked the same question. Well, how are you going to implement, and where are we going to spend this money? So we would be, well, we're happy to take those questions and try to, work this over the next month or so to get everybody the information that they need, whether it's about the data or whether it's about the implementation. And my comment was just so that we don't have to rush through it today. But there, however you want to set it up so that we can have this exchange, so that everybody feels comfortable with the information and that their question has been answered, and so that we can get to that February meeting and have a more directed discussion on implementation, and also hopefully walk away with the approval on the 150.
So I think that's fair enough. And I think, Blaze, you probably have a good idea of what's needed, but certainly Laura can talk directly with you. We haven't yet heard from Nisha to see if she has any questions just for the overview. And maybe I'll talk with Roland in terms of what other dates for the capital meetings, but we'll work that out, but that's still being worked out as, I guess, anyway.
Yeah, we
So-
have a good plan for the drainage. That's actually pretty well mapped out. So that is, instead of going through it today, we can get it to you in advance of the meeting. I think is a good idea, and we'll break that out by fiscal year. So the 350, what we're going to use that for, the 150 that's conditioned, how they work together, break each fiscal year, and then the proposed additional 600,000.
I think that would be constructive. both by field and by the detail of use. So Nisha, do you have any overall questions here or?
I do. And if they're not appropriate for this meeting, please let me know, because this is my first BET meeting. So bear with me. The first question I wrote down was, I was going through the master plan, which it looks like you guys discussed perhaps a year ago. Some of the estimates that you have per field, or for the 27 fields or so. Can you help and I don't know, again, if this is something that's appropriate for this meeting, the estimates that are in those, in that plan, can you help me understand how you come up with those? I saw at the end, there was a $1 per square foot number, ABC kind of structure of, if you go, depending on which path we choose. So that's one question. And then the second is, have these fields ever been, I don't know if renovated is the right word, or improved? When was the last time these fields were improved? Is it, maybe you've done one field at a time, or multiple fields at a time? And is there any cost that you can share for past projects to get us to help, I don't study fields for a living, so just to get a frame of mind of how to think about costing in all of this. And then the third question I have, I'm just going to throw them all out there, and if you can choose to answer or not answer, that's fine. A part of the within that same master plan, or that plan, there was a discussion on that you, I think, surveyed a certain number of people, 1,700 people, of which 90% said they didn't use the fields, or a large number. Is that indicative of how, that seemed very low to me, that only 10% of our residents use these fields? Who did you actually survey? Was it just a broad-based 1,700 person survey, or were you surveying like a school body or a parent body? Because 10% of the body is, translates to something like 6,000 people, of which half of them were happy with the fields. Then it comes down to 3,000 people that maybe are not happy with the fields. Then you break it down per field, it's like 100 people per field don't like the fields. So I'm just trying to get a sense of priority based, like what fields should we be focused on in terms of usage? So if you have a usage per field, for example, central middle fields are used more than western and so forth. So when we think about this for the next meeting, and we think about it from a budget perspective, help us kind of think about where to focus our attention on, meaning which fields are used the most. Is that where the drainage is going? I'm not here to question the analysis. Was very deep in terms of, I couldn't really honestly follow all that data. Maybe to Laura's point, that was a lot of data thrown out. So the question really is not to question the actual data that came out of it, but just help us think about the costing of it and prioritization.
Sure.
So I think those are good questions to consider as they're looking at their February, department meeting with the budget committee. And, I have a couple too that, relate to Western Field, what you're planning, what if there are more additional, turf, another, synthetic turf. Another is, these synthetic turf fields seem to last, and Joe, you'd have a better idea, 8 to 10 years or something like that. Clearly, when we start redoing these fields, and we have here Western, but we don't see, 10 years out or something, the redo of all the Western fields. I think all that needs to go into the capital plan too. You have to relook at GHS to estimate, the football field, whatever fields are, synthetic, when they will need to be redone and just, factor that in too. But I think that all falls for the February meeting. And so I would suggest that we're at a point maybe where we can wrap this up. And we thank you very much for the details, for the presentation. Thank Joe and Blaze and Ryan and the others in the department that are watching. And we look forward to seeing you at some date in February, and also at our budget committee meeting on February 16th. And I see Joe's hand is up.
Leslie, for the questions, will you route the questions to us? Will they come to you and you'll send them to us?
We will normally do that, but I think the questions raised today They will be online, and I know Blaze has a lot, I mean, you know, the YouTube will be posted. Blaze can look at that again, or, you know, there'll be minutes, whatever. So I think that,
I think
you know,
I got almost
I hate
all
to
of
go
them.
over all those things again, but I think that, you know, as in every other year, we will be forwarding questions, because the only questions you got today are from our budget committee members. And I'm sure, you know, we have both of our Parks and Rec liaisons are listening. I didn't even get to them yet, but I think at this point we sort of laid out a plan. And, you know, I think it's probably not necessary to even call for a vote today based on where we are, because we really didn't get that detailed information. And then we look forward to seeing you on February 16th, and perhaps sometime earlier than that date for the capital meeting. And you'll hear, you know, about that sometime soon from Roland. Does that sound fair?
That sounds good. And I think I have all the questions. So I think we're in fairly good shape for now.
Yeah, but there may be more. I mean, that always
Yep.
happens. And you know, as always, the process will remain the same. The questions will come from Roland. They'll be, you know, accumulated. They'll come from Roland. And, you know, there may be, you know, another meeting or two in between. So, you know, the process will remain approximately the same as it has been in past years. So thank you so much for a very informative time. We appreciate the time and effort put into it. And we also thank Leslie and Laura and Nisha for spending so much time on short notice, guys. Oh, and I'll add, yeah, it would be really helpful, especially during the very busy February time, if you could make sure that you get the supporting work in the Wednesday before. So that's our normal day for the budget committee meetings.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. So now we have Roland
Thank you.
here, and we say goodbye to you guys. And bye, Ryan. So Roland, would you like to go through our revenues? And I think we see some good news once again, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, conveyance tax has already exceeded budget for the year after just 6 months. And building permits are, you know, highest have been this time for the last 5 years. Interest is what interest is, but in total, we are $15.7 million ahead of last year. The bulk of that is the higher tax collections of almost $14 million. That continues to run really well. The other big difference is bridge revenue this year compared to last year is $1 million up, and that accounts for pretty much the entire favorable variance on the revenue side.
I'm sorry, the $1 million was what, Roland?
Bridges this year
Bridges.
compared to last year.
Thank you.
Like I said, that accounts for virtually the entire favorable variance.
Yeah, it's great the way the conveyance taxes and the building permits have held up. Okay, so then
You're expecting a
then we-
downturn at some point on them, but they're still continuing to hold up at least through the first 6 months of the year.
Just to
And
put
as far as
those,
the expenses, you know, it's kind of like it was last year. The big variances are the higher pension contribution, the higher capital contribution we made to the Z fund. Some of the other ones are the Board of Ed. We have higher salaries and IT costs. Those are the IT costs that were rolled into the operating budget from capital last year. And the other difference is healthcare is up compared to last year, about $1.6 million. And that accounts for $9 million. So we continue to be over higher spending compared to a year ago by pretty much the same items every month.
But higher spending, but our revenues are also exceeding our budget also.
Right.
So overall, our fund balance is increasing. Or will, or should, depending on where we end up.
Yep.
Leslie,
So
it's a slightly related note, but just to highlight, I think an information request that I think that I will have for going the budget meetings. when we get there in February, if we could run a year-to-date expense by the department that we're seeing. So, we have it here, but we'll have that updated for whatever date that is so that we can use that as we're looking at their budget request for 23.
Did you, Leslie, did you want that year-to-date compared to the budget this year, or year-to-date compared to year-to-date last year?
See, it's always dangerous when you ask that question. The answer is both.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. That was a good question. It helps us get ready, helps Roland get ready so he knows what to expect. So Roland, any further comments, or is that where we are at this point?
That's all.
So, I just want to make a comment here because a lot of times at this point, I mentioned the Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI for our area. And our meeting is so early this month that number is not until tomorrow. So we won't even touch it. So the next item we have is our minutes. Do we have a motion to accept our minutes since we have 4 people, of which 2 were here in December and 2 weren't. So that normal process is to accept, not approve. Is that correct, Leslie?
Yeah, yes, and I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of December 14th Budget Committee meeting, as well as the December 16th special meeting.
Is there a second to that motion? So I'll
Second.
second that motion. I'm sorry, who else second?
I can second. I was watching the GCTV budget meeting on the 14th on Zoom. So even though I'm not listed as being present, I was there for the duration of the meeting. So
Well, sorry about that.
I suggest a Scrivener's error to include Laura in the list of.
well,
attendants.
I was watching on TV, so I don't
Oh,
know,
okay.
Kathy would know that. So it's hard to.
So Laura,
Fine.
so Laura, you've raised something that, we're going to fix this year. We're not necessarily, PET members obviously, are important to include. But, we've included a lot of people on Zoom, and we never include those people on Channel 4, 24/79, and who are watching live by YouTube. So we need to, we'll make some changes there. Simple changes just to simplify our minutes, but we'll include you on this one.
Doesn't matter.
So those in favor? Nisha? Okay, 400. So just, a couple of notes here before we adjourn. The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, February 16th, which we mentioned earlier with Parks and Rec. That again will be at 1 p.m. And all budget committee meetings for the remainder of the year will also be at 1 p.m., the regular monthly meetings, at least as scheduled today. So those changes will be made in the calendar. In addition, we will be posting at some point in time in the next week or so, our Roland, maybe it won't be quite that fast, but sometime in that kind of time frame, our calendar for our meetings for the budget cycle. In addition, because of the COVID, we will also be holding our public hearing for the first selectmen's delivery of this budget and the BOE delivery of their budget by Zoom. So I think, people have been asking, will they be coming? And I think the answer to that question is that the town hall meeting room is not open to the public. So, I'm going to make that announcement at this point in time that they'll be making, and we'll go through the rest of it, individually discussion and there's a lot of work to be done. We might be a little bit behind this year, right, Roland, because the budget is still in process, but we'll be there in 2 weeks. Two weeks from today is the big day. So we'll see you all that day on at 6 p.m. and we will then have our next monthly meeting at 1 p.m. on the 16th of February. So is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
So motion to adjourn made by Leslie and seconded by Laura. And 400. So I thank you all, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.